Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most alarming developments on the global stage, a situation that feels like the world is teetering on the edge of all-out war. Russia, Iran, and Israel are all making moves that are shaking the foundation of international peace. Tensions are no longer just simmering, they're boiling. Every move, every statement, every strike is pushing the planet closer to a dangerous point of no return. In the last few months, the global power balance has shifted dramatically. Russia's war in Ukraine continues to rage with no end in sight. Iran is stepping up its regional ambitions, and Israel is engaged in one of the most volatile security situations in decades. Together, their actions are creating a chain reaction that could engulf multiple regions in conflict. What's happening right now is not isolated, it's interconnected, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Russia, still locked in its brutal campaign against Ukraine, is becoming increasingly desperate to maintain leverage and influence. The war has drained its economy, exposed weaknesses in its military, and isolated it from much of the world. But rather than stepping back, Moscow is doubling down. It's forming closer military and political alliances with nations like Iran and North Korea, creating what some analysts are calling a new axis of resistance against the West. Weapons are being exchanged, strategies are being shared, and the narrative of standing up to Western dominance is stronger than ever. Iran, meanwhile, is capitalizing on this shifting power dynamic. With Western attention focused on Ukraine, Tehran has expanded its regional footprint. Through its network of proxy groups across the Middle East, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq and Syria, Iran has become a central player in nearly every major conflict in the region. Its support for these groups has emboldened them to launch attacks not only against Israel, but also against American and Western interests. Iran's nuclear ambitions are once again becoming a global concern. Reports indicate that Tehran is closer than ever to being able to produce a nuclear weapon, and that has set off alarm bells in Israel and Washington. For Israel, the situation is becoming unbearable. Surrounded by hostility and facing constant rocket fire from Hamas and Hezbollah, Israel sees itself at war on multiple fronts. The recent escalation with Iran-backed militias has pushed the country to launch a series of powerful retaliatory strikes. These strikes are not just defensive, they are strategic. Israel wants to send a clear message that any attempt to surround or weaken it will be met with overwhelming force. But this aggressive defense risks igniting something far bigger. Each strike against Iranian targets in Syria or Lebanon risks triggering a direct response from Tehran itself. What makes this moment even more dangerous is that none of these powers are acting in isolation. Russia's deepening alliance with Iran is now giving Moscow access to Iranian-made drones and missiles, which are being used on the battlefields of Ukraine. In exchange, Russia is providing Iran with advanced fighter jets and satellite technology tools that could significantly enhance Tehran's military capabilities. This trade of military resources and intelligence is strengthening both sides and destabilizing multiple regions at once. Meanwhile, the United States and its allies are watching closely, but they're also stretched thin. Washington continues to pour billions of dollars into Ukraine's defense, while simultaneously backing Israel's right to defend itself. But as both conflicts intensify, questions are growing about how long Western nations can sustain this level of involvement. Europe, facing economic strain and political divisions, is struggling to maintain unity on foreign policy. The global system built after World War II, one meant to prevent exactly this kind of worldwide escalation, is starting to crack. Iran's latest moves have been particularly provocative. Its proxies are attacking shipping routes in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, disrupting global trade and driving up oil prices. Every one of these attacks reverberates around the world, affecting not just the Middle East but economies everywhere. The global energy market is once again in turmoil, and the fear of a larger war is driving uncertainty across financial markets. Countries that rely on stable oil prices are suddenly finding themselves vulnerable. At the same time, Israel's leadership has made it clear that it will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power. This is a red line for Israel, one it has said repeatedly it is willing to enforce through military action if necessary. If Israel were to launch a preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, the entire Middle East could erupt into war. Iran would likely retaliate directly, unleashing missiles on Israeli cities and encouraging Hezbollah to attack from the north. The United States, bound by decades of alliance, would be drawn in. Russia, on the other hand, might side more openly with Iran, deepening the divide between the world's major powers. The situation in Ukraine adds another layer of complexity. Russia's frustration with Western sanctions and military aid to Ukraine is pushing it to seek revenge in other arenas. Moscow's relationship with Tehran and Beijing is strengthening precisely because they share a common enemy, the Western order led by the United States. Together, they are challenging that order through economic partnerships, energy deals, and coordinated messaging that paints the West as hypocritical and declining. In this multipolar world, where alliances shift quickly and power is more distributed, the old systems of deterrence don't work the same way. Countries like Iran feel emboldened because they know that Washington can't be everywhere at once. Russia feels free to test NATO's limits because it senses hesitation among European leaders, and Israel, seeing itself increasingly isolated, believes it has no choice but to act decisively, even if it risks broader war. We are now witnessing what experts call conflict contagion, when one war fuels another and regional disputes become global crises. The war in Ukraine has strained global resources, divided nations, and emboldened adversaries. The escalating conflict in the Middle East threatens to do the same. If these two flashpoints continue to intensify simultaneously, they could merge into a truly global confrontation involving the world's most powerful nations. The humanitarian toll is already staggering. In Ukraine, cities remain under constant bombardment, and millions of civilians have been displaced. In Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, countless lives have been lost as airstrikes and retaliations spiral out of control. The international community is struggling to respond, as diplomatic channels that once kept peace are now nearly broken. The United Nations has been reduced to issuing statements, while real decisions are made on battlefield. Meanwhile, propaganda and disinformation are fueling the fire. Each side is waging not only a physical war, but also an information war, shaping narratives, justifying aggression, and turning global opinion in their favor. The internet has become another front line, where truth is often the first casualty. The question now is, can the world step back from the brink? History shows that most great wars didn't start because one side wanted total destruction. They began with miscalculations, chain reactions, and leaders under pressure making short-sighted decisions. We are in that danger zone again. Every missile launched, every strike conducted, and every word spoken by leaders has the potential to spiral out of control. Diplomatic efforts are still underway, but with little success. The U.S. and European powers are trying to re-engage Iran in talks, while at the same time urging restraint from Israel. Russia remains defiant, insisting that the West caused the crisis by expanding NATO and interfering in its sphere of influence. China, watching all of this unfold, sees an opportunity to position itself as a peace broker, but also as a future superpower ready to fill any vacuum left by Western decline. The economic side of this crisis is equally serious. As conflicts expand, global trade routes are threatened, inflation rises, and food insecurity worsens. Nations that depend on grain exports from Ukraine or oil from the Middle East are being squeezed. The world's poorest countries are suffering the most, while wealthier nations are bracing for another wave of economic instability. It's becoming clear that the world is entering a new era, one defined by instability and confrontation rather than cooperation. The idea of a single dominant global power maintaining peace is fading. Instead, we are seeing a fragmented world where multiple centers of power compete and collide. In such a world, misunderstandings can turn deadly fast. Right now, the choices made by a handful of leaders in Moscow, Tehran, Jerusalem, Washington, and Beijing will determine the fate of billions. If they choose confrontation, the result could be catastrophic. But if they choose restraint and dialogue, there's still hope to avoid a global catastrophe. However, hope alone won't be enough. The international community needs decisive, united action to de-escalate these flashpoints. That means re-establishing communication channels, rebuilding trust, and focusing on diplomacy rather than domination. It means powerful nations must act responsibly, not out of pride or vengeance, but for the survival of humanity itself. The world is watching as these powers make their next moves. Every step taken by Russia, Iran, or Israel will have consequences that ripple across the planet. The choices of a few could ignite a conflict involving millions. The stakes couldn't be higher, and time is running out. So as we look at the growing fires across Ukraine and the Middle East, one thing becomes clear: peace has never been more fragile, and war has never been closer. The world stands at a crossroads. Either leaders pull back and choose reason over rage, or we all move toward a future none of us can survive. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching and staying informed. These are complex times, and understanding them is more important than ever. Stay tuned, because what happens next could change everything.